Welcome, everybody, to another VITA Academy webinar. Today, we've got the great Dr. Miguel Ortiz. Hi, Miguel. How are you doing?
Pretty good. How is everybody doing today?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for joining us today, going over what today's topic, Endocrown success, selection of restorative material and bonding technique. Some of you may not know this, but Dr. Ortiz is also a technician. And so he's going to come after this topic from both sides. So please, watch this and learn from it. And at the end, if you have some questions, we will get to those. So, Endocrowns, success. Dr. Ortiz, I'm going to go ahead and give you the presentation mode.
Thank you, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be with you. It's always a pleasure to work with you. You have shown during the years that I know you to be such a patient man and very helpful to me, my team, my courses. So on a personal level, I want to tell you that I appreciate a lot of what you do. Hello, everybody. Here I am in Boston. My name is Dr. Miguel Ortiz. I am a prosthodontist, and this heavy accent comes from being a world champion because I'm Argentinian, and I've been in the US for about 20-something years. I'm married, I had 3 kids, and I'm in my home. I have a clinic in where I do prosthodontic work as well as restorative work here in Boston. And I also the CEO and chairman of the Dental Academy, an academy where we do continuing education courses hands-on. And I also do a lot of education for free on my Instagram account. But that's just a little bit about me. In the early 2000s, I was a technician in Los Angeles. Then I went to dental school here in Boston at Harvard, and then I went to Chicago to get my pros training. So I got a little bit of many things, but I want to tell you a story because today we're going to talk about endocrowns and endolays, but I'm going to come at it from a different way. Most presentations that you're going to see nowadays in congresses are very flashy, very beautiful pictures. People will talk about how they do things and show you the steps. But the conversation about science has been left behind, I believe, on most congresses. Why? Because it's boring. To talk about science and to review papers is boring. But if you're here on a Friday, somewhere between 9 a.m. and 12 a.m. in the East Coast on a Thursday, to listen to me is probably because you care. But not only because you care, but also you're taking time from something else important that you were doing to listening to me. So what I wanted to do today is create a new presentation for you. A presentation where we have to come out of it with some solid understanding of facts. Are facts truth? No, facts might be the closest that we have to the actual truth, but I don't want to get too philosophical. Facts can change over time, but that doesn't mean that we don't have some facts right now that can be used to serve as decision making. I want to show you the science behind endocrowns, and then I want to open the discussion so that you can ask me as many questions as you want. Let me tell you my story with endocrowns. And if you don't know what an endocrown is, there's one in the picture right there. Back in the year 2003, 2004, I was working in a lab. I was doing wax up and metal finishing and a little bit of porcelain in Los Angeles. And the lab had like 100, 120 dentists, I remember. And so I will see a little bit of everything. Most of them were pretty ugly preps and bad impressions. Some of them were really good. But there were 2 dentists who were doing something different. So I knew how to treat an endodontically treated tooth, a posterior tooth with an endo, because I will get many impressions in which I will be asked to do a cast post and core and sometimes a crown at the same time. So I will have my model, I will have my die, it will have this little die with a hole in it where the access hole will go in for the endo, and I will have to wax up a core out of metal. Then I will have to cast it, invest it, cast it, finish it, fit it in. And if you were to ever attempt to wax the cast and post together, and if you were going to try to wax the crown together and cast them together, they will never sit. So you will have to do it in 2 steps. Once I have that cast, post, and core finished and on the die, then I will wax up the crown or the coping for a PFM. And those 2 things will go to the dentist. Now, one of those dentists will do it different. He will want the post and cores to be shipped to him, and then he will take another impression of the post and core in the mouth, and now you will get a regular, die with a retention and resistant form, and then you will do the crown on it. Now, doing that, I learned that it's really hard as a technician to wax up a post and core. Sometimes you have to do it in 2 pieces because like a puzzle, if not, it doesn't draw in because of the diverging of the crowns. And man, I hated those days because money-wise, to me, it wasn't that much money. I was getting paid, I remember, like $5 a unit for waxing and $3 a unit for finishing it. And this will, man, I can do a coping in 20 minutes and this will take forever. So at that time, there was another doctor who would ask for something like this. And he will say, here's the tooth with an endo big hole in it, and what I want is a crown. And he will make them out of gold. So I will wax a lot of this. And I remember that knowing how hard it was to do a post, knowing how hard it was to do it 2 pieces, understanding very well how those 2 or 3 pieces come together, not perfectly ever, it always stood in my mind this doctor who was doing this, because to me it made sense. Why are we doing more pieces? I never understood why we're doing several pieces. Then I went to dental school, and as you go to dental school, they teach you everything you need to know about, restoring teeth or simply restoring teeth. And we talk about post and ferrule and core and retention and resistance and 6 taper degree and the height of the molar and all those studies that show that you have to do that you have to put a post. The root canal teeth in the posterior need to put a post and a crown and a core. And when I asked at dental school, nobody was able to tell me why this didn't work. Well, you need to put a post and you need to put a core. And I would say, well, what's the post for? It's to hold the core. And what's the core for? Well, it's to hold the crown. I'm like, and why can't it all be all together? Why can't it all be one piece? Well, no, it cannot be one piece. And there was never a clear answer. So I started like itching now because now I'm understanding dentistry. Then I go to residency for prosthodontics and we review all the literature even more in depth. And again, not even the program director they will give me answers. They will say, no, because look at this paper, look at that paper. I'm like, yeah, isn't this the same? What is the difference between the core being bonded to the crown or the core being part of the crown? To me, it's like you adding a layer for no reason. At that point, by the end, I had a couple cases and I started doing it like this. I remember a professor that got upset when I was in the school, my residency, when I did one like this. And by then I had a bunch of papers that I was like, hey, I'm not crazy here. There's something to it. By the time I came into my private practice 6-7 years ago, I've never done a post and a core ever again. And I became very outspoken about endocrowns and subsequently endolays. So what I want to do today is I want to separate this into 2 parts with a third one at the end. Let's say 3 parts. The first one will take about 80% of our presentation. I want you guys to walk with me through all the relevant literature about endocrowns. Let's, for once and for all of you will know what the literature says. And anything else that anybody says is opinion. So hold your ground after you've seen the literature. Go find them and read every paper, because I'm going to show you like 60 different papers. Go find it and read them yourself. No, I'm not going to send them to you because that's illegal. So if you're going to send me an email and say, send me that paper, take a screenshot and then look at it in PubMed. But once we go through all of it, then we're going to talk about how to prep, why we prep like that, how we look at an impression, how a laboratory should think of these restorations. And hopefully, when somebody else says anything about an endocrown, you will know what to answer, knowing on what you saw, know what you think you know. Okay, so that's the thing. It's a little bit of a dry presentation at the beginning, and then we get into I'm going to show you cases, and then I'm going to open it up to discussion. I think showing cases is important, but it's a little bit irrelevant too. It's just a bunch of pictures. I think it's more interesting for me to open it up for you guys at the end, and so that we can have an open conversation that sometimes brings better points than only what I can think of saying. So without further ado, and knowing that my 3 little kids are downstairs and they can burst through this door at any time, don't worry, if they do, I'll kick them out, okay? So endolays or endocrowns, what are they? Are they something new? No, they're not something new. For many years, for the entire 20th century, some doctors been doing it because it makes sense. But the literature of how to restore these teeth started showing up somewhere in the late 70s, during the 80s. We have people posting, or not posting, publishing different ways of restoring posterior teeth. especially endo-treated posterior teeth. And there were many ideas. Amalgam was the #1 core material at the time, but you can also have a cast post-and-core. There's a lot of literature about cast post-and-core in the prosthodontics literature for the second half of the 20th century. So it's nothing new, but in the 80s, some people started to hint that, hey, what if we do it all one piece? Now, one thing that we're going to have to answer is, are endodontically treated teeth, for now on, we're going to call it ETT, endodontically treated teeth, and mostly I'm talking about the posterior, more fragile than regular teeth? Because this is kind of like a myth that a lot of people think that, oh, that's an endo tooth is more fragile. That's an endo tooth is more dry. That's an endo tooth is at higher risk for fracture. Is it true that an endodontically treated teeth is more fragile just because it's endo treated? Obviously, it's more fragile because it has a hole, but that tooth over time gets dried out and easier to fracture more than the day after the endo, right? That's how I want to think about it. You do the endo, that is a treatment, that is an aggressive treatment, no matter how you think about it. We are removing things from the tooth that might make the tooth more fragile, more prone to fracture. But that moment that you finish the root canal, is that tooth more fragile 5 years later because it's root canal treated versus one that was not? And the answer has been no, it is not. And it's been almost 30 years that we know endodontically treated teeth, just because of the endo and beyond what the endo did to it, they are not more fragile a million years after. Okay? And there are studies that show, and I'm going to come back to this study later, unless I put it in the wrong place. I think I did. I put this in the wrong place. There are studies that show that what makes a tooth fragile is the loss of marginal ridges. We're going to talk about that a lot today. And it's also the over-prepping and removal or sound enamel. So there are studies like this in which we can prep a tooth for an inlay, for a non-lay, for a, let's say, almost a half a crown, because we're testing the back wall of this premolar, and then we test it. And which is the worst that behaves structurally in fracture when you start putting forces from the top? The one at the bottom, okay? The one at the bottom, the one that you cut that cast completely all the way around because you were surrounding it, because you thought you were reinforcing this tooth, is the one that behaves the worst. And this science isn't very clear. Now, if sometimes you need to cap a clasp to protect a wall from breaking, that is all you need to do. You need to cap the clasp. You don't need to wrap it around. And I'm going to show you lots of science on this. So what makes a tooth becomes more fragile? In 1989, there was one seminal study that is famous and all of us supposed to know, so I'm going to break it down for you. Showed that if we get a virgin tooth, right, a virgin tooth, and we push from the top, kind of like occlusal force, we push until it fractures, like in this diagram. Whatever force it took to break, let's call that 100, right? It took 100 newtons, let's say, to break a virgin tooth. Now let's evaluate what happened when we do endo. If breaking an unaltered tooth is 100, the results show that when you do the access for the endo, the instrumentation, the obturation, we barely lose 5% of that stiffness, of that resistance to fracture. But if that tooth had an MOD preparation before, like an MOD amalgam that you removed or composite, and then you did the endo, it only takes 31 to fracture that tooth. So yes, endodontic treatment does a little bit to the tooth. You lost about 5%, and there's discrepancy there. It seems like it goes up from 94 to 96 because there's a standard of error measurement that we have to account for. But the reality is that the loss of marginal ridges is what makes a tooth be more prone to fractures, caspal wall fracture. You can do an occlusal filling or an occlusal preparation for a filling, and it will be 80. If you have an MO or a DO, it will be, that's supposed to be 60, not 96. And then by the time you go to an MOD, it's 31. So it is clear that, and it's been clear for a long time, that what makes a tooth be more prone to extraction because it had a fracture or made more prone to fracture that leads to extractions or catastrophic failure is the loss of marginal ridges. Some of you follow me in social media, you know that I'm a big proponent of the notion, the fact by now, that retention and resistant forms are no longer needed in dentistry. That this idea that we need a crown to reinforce a tooth is wrong, because when you do a crown, a full cover restoration, and you remove a marginal ridge to do that, you're actually harming the tooth. You're not making it better. So now that we know that root canal treatment is not a problem for the tooth more than 5%, it's structurally doing it, but the loss of marginal ridges is, what is the #1 complication of an endodontically treated teeth in the posterior region? Is it fracture? Because we're always restoring to protect from fracture. Like, it always seems to be that. And the reality is that the #1 reason why an endodontically treated tooth or a crown on a regular tooth fails is because it's caries. Most of the time, most of the dentistry that you do in your practice, and you know this, and most of the cases that you get in the lab to restore to the dentist that are sending you the job, most of them, about 98% of them, and this has been recorded, is because of caries. It's not because of fracture. Like, when we have the patient come in and sit down, and I am looking at their x-rays and I'm doing the hygiene checkup, most of my next appointments for next week or in 2 weeks, when I fill my schedule, I want to see you for 2 hours, I want to see you to do this. I'm most of the time thinking about or seeing, you have a cavity right there. You have a crack on the tooth that shows a cavity. You have a cavity under the crown. You have a cavity interproximally. You have a cavity, and I need to fix it. Some of them are big, some of them are small. But rarely you see, come back next week because you have a broken crown. It happens. It's a small percentage, but it's like less than once a week. It's like maybe once a month. Unless you're doing something wrong and you're getting a lot of your own crowns broken, that's something else that we need to talk about. But this idea that we're always protecting things from breaking does not correlate with what we see clinically. And to overdo the solution for something that is not a real problem, it's a real problem. What is the restorative treatment that actually has been proven to affect an endodontically treated tooth negatively? Posts. We know the science is very clear that posts are negative for teeth. Posts are detrimental for teeth. You said, but Miguel, that's not what I learned. That's not what I read. I've always been taught to use posts. The reason you have a feeling to deny this statement is because you might be confusing what you need posts to do versus what posts actually do. So those two things could be parallel and true at the same time. A post can be bad for the tooth, but it might be able to help to hold your core and then your restoration. And those are two different things. Have you noticed that every time that a patient comes in with caries under restoration or on a tooth, you don't feel that guilty? But when a patient comes in and there's a problem with a restoration that you do, you feel like you did something wrong? That feeling tells you something about what we dentists care about. We want our work not to fail. And when our work, quote unquote, because I don't assume that everything is a failure, fails, then we remember that. It kind of hurts. Like, it's a bad day when a crown that you did 6 months ago debonded, broke, chipped, or when a crown that you did 2 years ago has open margins and secondary decay. And then we are much more tuned to overfix that is a minor problem versus the other one. And we've been overusing post and overusing retention and resistance as a reason to our work be there. That makes you feel that. But this has been proven that posts actually are negative impact to teeth. Back in 1994, we already had cases reported of people using the CEREC machine in-house very early to do endocrowns. So this is a 30-year thing. Let's jump to 2005, where we start really seeing people posting or publishing papers about biomechanics and forces and what happens if we put a post, what happens if we do an endocrown, how should we prep, how deep should we go. So all this exploded in the 2000s. And we got very good signs. Some of them started with finite element analysis, and then they will do the second stage of the study to see if what the final element analysis showed was true. And in most of the cases, this is such a straightforward scenario that the final element analysis show to be very well correlated to what we finally saw. By the end of the 2000s, we start seeing people saying, okay, we know what endocrowns are. Some people, we've been using them. How should we do them? How thick should the restoration be? How deep should we go inside the canal? What kind of material should be used? We start having very good papers. This is a very nice paper that I recommend you guys to read. This is a classic by Samet and Shakowitz that give you the first comprehensive chart to how to treat a tooth based on the ferrule. And then we have this study, which around this time, we've been having several like it. It's a 7-year study where we are analyzing the performance, the clinical performance of these restorations. This one showed that we can indeed restore teeth that are severely damaged with an endocrown, a one-piece restoration, versus doing the post, the core, the crown, and that it will be successful. With final element analysis and with clinical studies going on in the late 2000s and early 2010, we start getting good data. And that good data starts showing that, well, how big should this endocrown be? Can we have a tooth that is level to the gum level, and then we build it up with an endocrown? Can we do one that is missing a wall? Can the hole be bigger? Can the hole be smaller? And we showed that they all work, and they all work as good as the 3-step system post, core, and crown. We started doing combination of like if I do the exam, right? We start doing or seeing a combination of research in which they start testing if the 1-piece versus the 3-piece and which one is better. And some studies by now start showing clinically and in the laboratory that it is better to have 1-piece than to have a 3-piece system. If you have divergent roots, what are the occlusion, what are the forces? Most of these studies are starting to show that, yes, everything will break if you put enough force, but in order to break an endocrown or an endolay, and in order to break a crown with a post and a core, it takes way above normal masticatory forces to do so. So even though if we see a difference between those two objectives or those two comparisons, the classical and the endocrown, we know that at the testing level, we're using much higher forces than anybody can chew. Premolars start being also a question now, because we've been getting, by now, mid-2010s, we've been getting very good science, systematic reviews, clinical science that shows endocrowns work. But premolars are a different beast, right? Premolars, you have a much smaller remnant of tooth structures usually. By the time you get a root canal, you're already lost mesial and distal, probably to an MOD restoration, and you know how the buccal and the lingual walls of a premolar work, because the neck of that, the CJ, is so narrow that these things tend to fracture. So making it work on premolars has been kind of like the work of the 2010s, because we know that they work in molars. And we start again, final element analysis, how much we prep, and the risk for fractures. So another paper here that using the knowledge that we have to the knowledge of the more marginal regions that you are missing, the higher risk for fracture, to try to see how should we prep. And again, this one shows that there's no reason for you to cap around the cusp. You just need to cover cusp mostly, and this is important, if you are missing a marginal ridge. On a premolar, you're missing one marginal ridge, you gotta cap both cusps, because you are going to cap a cusp when you're missing a marginal ridge that is next to it. Now, this is a simplification statement from a 2-day tooth preparation and adhesive reconstruction course that I have hands-on live, maybe 5 or 6 times a year, where I showed the entirety of the research on how to come out to this statement, but I'm going to repeat it as a conclusion to a 2-day course. you have to cap a cusp when a marginal ridge is missing next to it. On a molar that has 4 cusps, if you're missing the marginal ridge on the mesial, you might not need to cap the cusp on the distal. But on a premolar, you're missing a marginal ridge, you immediately have 2 cusps less that are next to a marginal ridge that is missing. So the moment you're missing one, you need to cap a cusp. So now we start thinking, what do we do with cases like this? We know we don't have to put a crown on it because we don't want to get rid of the marginal ridges. We see the gutta percha there. So a lot of questions are going to start arising. And I'm going to finish the questions at the end, but I wanted to show you that these are the kind of cases that we're talking about. Do we have to cover the gutta percha with something, or we should put the crown on top of it? Do we have to prep a ridge that is there to put a crown? Do we have to cap all the cusps? In this case, there is no sign that says that you have to cap, that you have to cover the gutta percha with like composite before you do your endocrown, but I do it. I run a little bit of flowable, make it easy, just a thin layer of flowable. However, you can take an impression like this, and eventually when you cement, your resin cement is resin. And your resin cement, if you deliver correctly, will be able to fill in the gap, just like if you do it before. So far, there is not a science that has even tested if you should cover the gutta percha or not. Most of the time I do it, but I wouldn't be opposed if you say, Miguel, I don't do it, I just let the cement do its thing. But let's say you have all of the walls right there. Just for what we've been talking right now, do you need to put an indirect restoration here in cat cusps and cat marginal ridges? No, you don't. Actually, the science doesn't say that you have to crown a posterior tooth because he has an endo. It really doesn't. It's been clear for almost 40 years. What the science shows, and the science is like, if you're missing a marginal ridge, you better cap those cusps. And the science shows that you should not extend over it either. So I've done molars like this, where you should do a filling on it. And that is not different than a class 1 restoration without the endo. I showed you what happened with endo-treated teeth and how their stiffness and propensity to crack diminished with the endo. It's nothing, it's like 4%. So the idea that you can do a big class 1, but all of a sudden, if you have an endo treatment and a case like this, now you have to crown or onlay this tooth is wrong. Now, I mentioned endocrowns and I mentioned endolays, and I want to make the difference. If you look in the literature, everything is going to be called an endocrown when we start talking about and discussing what this is. The problem with an endocrown, and it's a real problem because as I teach all around the country, I have a lot of students and a lot of dentists that ask me the same question, is that the name endocrown, even though if they know what I'm talking about, oh, it's this one piece that goes inside the chamber, yeah, implies to them that they also have to do a crown. So the number one question that I get, and I get it all the time, is like, oh, so an endocrown, so I go inside and then I do a regular crown on the outside. And my answer is like, no, you don't. What do you mean you don't? No, you go inside, and if you actually cap a cusp, you cap it. You reduce that 1.5 millimeters from the top, and that's it. You don't need to wrap it around. And seeing the faces of many dentists' confusion allowed me to maybe come out with a better name for these two situations. An endocrown, in my opinion, and maybe we can discuss this as a society, an endocrown is when you go inside and around and outside at the same time. When will that happen? Well, let's say a tooth had a crown already, and then you do a root canal on it. Now you remove that crown and you're going to remake it. Now you have this hole in here. Yeah, now you already have the tooth prep going inside and outside, right? Why will you do that? Well, because then you don't have to do a core buildup. You want to do a core buildup? Go ahead, do a core buildup. Are you charging the patient for the core buildup? Because it wasn't necessary. So it gets a little bit tricky ethically that way. It's like, can you do a core buildup in a hole and then just make a crown? Yes, you can. Did you charge the patient for a core buildup and a crown when you could have done just an endocrown? Yes, I did charge it. Well, maybe you overcharged the patient there because you didn't need to do it in 2-step. You could have done it in 2-step. I don't think you should charge though. So That's an endocrown to me. It goes outside, it goes inside. When does it go outside? When you already have a crown there. If you don't have a crown there, do not cut the tooth around for a crown. You remove the marginal ridges, you're increasing the propensity for the tooth to fracture by 70%, when you could have done an onlay, an endolay, right? So the difference between an endocrown and endolay is that the endolay goes inside the chamber and it caps the cusp just by maybe 1 or 2 millimeters. The rest is the tooth. Usually you're going to have most of the time the buccal and the lingual walls that are there, and you can save about 80% of it. Mesiodistal, most endo-treated tooth will be missing a wall because they usually start with a restoration already. Okay, so that is the difference between an endolay and an endocrown. An endolay is an onlay, just covering the cusp about 2 millimeters thick, and you go in one piece. An endocrown is when you go all around. I'm proposing that as a differentiation because I see that everybody still thinks that a posterior endodontically treated tooth needs to be full coverage to protect it from fracture. And I know you're removing the protection by cutting the enamel to put a tooth there. Okay, these are classic. This is a classic finding, I will say, for a posterior endo tooth. What do we used to do here? What does 99% of people still do, unfortunately? We will put a post, we will build up with core buildup, we will charge for the post and core, and then we will prep all around, removing the remaining walls to protect the remaining walls from breaking. Let me say that again. Most people here will put a post, will build the whole up with composite, quickly and ugly because you're prepping it, and then come all around and prep this whole thing for a crown. And you're doing that to protect these walls from fracturing. How does that make any sense? It never made any sense to me. And when I read all the science that I'm showing you right now, it was clear to me that most schools are teaching this wrong. That you have to cover the cusp here, but you can save the entirety of the wall, almost 80% of the wall. Why you want to do that? Well, because no matter what you do today, base case scenario, in 10 years, it has to be redone. And you want to have more enamel to bond to. And you want to have your margins super gingival so you can see them every time you come for a recall. Okay? Something like that is what I've been doing all the time. This is just an onlay. Okay? Here is an endolay. You see how it's not a crown. It goes in, and then it covers the cusps. So in 2013, we started having systematic reviews, and I'm going to start going a little bit faster now when it comes to all the literature that I still want to show you. This systematic review said that endocrowns should be considered. And when they say should be considered, is them saying it's time for them to use it, right? Because should be considered is a soft, publishable way of finishing a conclusion. Yeah, you know what? You should consider doing this versus the other one, although they both work well. In 2013, another endocrown case, several cases reported, endocrown should be considered. Now we have a 4-year of ceramic onlays versus endocrowns, meaning you do your buildup and your post and core, and then you put an onlay, right? You do your post core and onlay, more conservative than a crown, versus endocrowns. And endocrowns are 4 years out, seems to be successful. Another study, another way of showing and proposing that endocrowns are successful. Here we start talking about fracture resistance, and we start talking about materials in 2014. Now, in this one, I believe, if I remember correctly, they were doing lithium disilicate, hybrid, and resin. Lithium disilicate, you have to put more force to break them, but hybrid like Enamic or resin composites, like I think in that time it was Lava Ultimate or Cerasmar, I don't remember this one. They all function very well. Now, the thing about resin and feldspathic infiltrated with resin like Enamic is they mill better. The machinability is better, so you get better margin adaptation. But they all work very well. This one is, let's do a study between inlays and onlays. And this is kind of what, even before seeing this study, knowing what we know from the 90s about marginal ridges, I knew what the answer for this one was going to be. Is it better to do an inlay or an onlay? No, it's better to do an onlay. And it was very clear. Once you have an MOD, that is the problem. So just you doing an inlay all across and then expect to behave as good as an onlay, it's not a good idea. This will put that backward cast, in this case, the picture D, at a higher risk for fracture. When you just cap it a little bit, I actually think they were very aggressive on capping in this case in that picture. I will have cut much less of it. You have a better prognosis. We started having systematic reviews by the second half of the 2010s that show that endocrowns perform equal or better than the conventional post-Corgan crown. Another in 2016 that showed that post did no help, it made it worse. We're starting to see in premolars what are the, depending if you have ferrule, if you don't have ferrule, how deep it goes into the tooth, what's going to happen, is it going to fracture? And again, the post and core and all of that did not do better than the endocrowns, and the endocrowns are as good. Okay, we start talking about marginal adaptation. Actually, marginal adaptation of one piece versus 3 pieces is better with an endocrown. Another study suggesting, okay, how much stuff, it depends how much structure we have left, how is it going to behave? It's about the same. On premolars, if you're missing a lot of tooth structure versus a little tooth structure, they all need more the masticatory forces to break. Another study in 2016 that it shows that the material of choice is not an issue. Remember, I told you on the description of this lecture that we were going to talk about material of choice, and we are. I'm going to show you how to prep for this, and I'm going to talk about material of choice. But many studies, when they start comparing, they usually compare zirconia, lithium silicates, resin, and hybrids, or hybrid. The only hybrid in the market is ceramic. It shows that everything will break at some point, everything will debond at some point, and everything does at a much higher force than masticatory forces. So it doesn't seem like breakage or protection from breakage is something that we need to think when we choose the material. Now, there are many different reasons why we will choose a material. Color, ease of handling, what your laboratory likes to do, how is your bonding protocol? Do you have an in-house milling or not? Do you want to bake or you want to just mill and deliver? So the, aesthetics, translucency, all of those things could be reasons why you choose a material. It doesn't seem to be the case for fractures. We have this case at 3 years out that different materials, they all will work well. I like this clinical study, and this should be the one in 2017, and this is when I was coming out of residency, like I was a couple of years out of residency, when this is the one that closed it for me. A great clinical study. They did about 500 units, okay? 212 crowns, the 3-step post-core crown on endo treated teeth, and 235 endocrowns. It's a clinical study. They followed it up for to 7 years in 2017. I've been waiting for them to publish again. It should be about 13 years now. And at that point, 7 years out, which is a good number, they had 6 failures, and 5 of them were in the crown scenario, and only 1 was the endocrown. So at that point, 7 years out, in the mouth, hundreds of clinical cases deliver. This is the one that I was like, okay, that's it. We have something that works better than the one before. And we have something that we can be more conservative. Because a lot of people will do a crown prep, so the crown will stay in because they still believe that retention and resistance is needed. And retention resistant form is not needed anymore because the amount of retention that you get from adhesion is as good. And the studies, I can show you hundreds of studies in my course that show how clinically a bonded onlay is better or equal or better than a crown. But once you have now the retention and resistant form from the inside of the chamber instead of from the outside, even that argument goes out of the window. It makes total sense that the internal retention is equal or better than a crown. Okay. It seems that if you go deeper into the chamber, you reinforce the tooth a little bit more, meaning it takes more to break it. Another study in 2017, clinically as well, that work as well as post-Corgan crown, and you're starting to see, hopefully now, that when I come in social media, that when I say endocrowns, please, endolays, please, it's not just an opinion. Okay, both lithium silicates and dynamic clinically behave well here. They started using PIC now usually when something gets proven, then people start either to want to write a paper or a company wants a material. PIC is as good as lithium silicates. Who's going to use PIC? I don't know. There's another one in which it was very interesting. It hasn't been replicated. I don't know if I believe it, but scientifically, I have to believe the results. That you put an endocrown and you try to break it on a tooth, and then the endocrown will restore the rigidity or fracture resistance of that tooth almost to intact tooth levels. But a post didn't do that. So do I believe it too much? No, I will actually say, okay, yeah, endocrowns work, and we can keep going. Okay, I can show you paper after paper after paper. Okay, we get to the systematic reviews of survival and success, and it says, yeah, endocrowns are the way to go. That resin and hybrid materials can be used, lithium silicates can be used. Zirconia, can we use zirconia? Yes, we can. You can use whatever you want. However, many of you probably are thinking about the number 2 question that I usually get, which is, what if I had to retreat? What if I had to retreat? I don't like it because if I had to retreat, first of all, you never care about that before. Never ever you care about that before. When you were actually putting a post into the tooth. All of a sudden, when we say, let's do this crown that goes in, everybody freaks out because of retreatment. Now, ask the endodontist what the word things that they hate when you send them for a retreat. Have you noticed that they say a post and it's like, now, tooth is probably fractured. I recommend extraction and implant. Has anybody noticed that? Endodontist saying a lot, now, I think the tooth is fractured, and there's a post there. They never want to retreat those. No, because removing that post is a pain in the neck. So we never cared before, but everybody cares now. And yes, if you have to retreat, what do we do? Well, I will say one thing. Don't make these things out of zirconia. Really, don't make these things out of zirconia. Because you actually drill that thing out, good luck. I have spent 20 minutes on it. However, you make them out of Suprinity, which is lithium, zirconia reinforced lithium silicate. You make them out of Emax. Lithium disilicate, you make it out of a resin block. You make it out of a feldspatic block like Mark II. You make it out of enamic. It will take you 30 seconds to get a rough diamond and go like this from the top, and you should drill right through it. Trust me, I've done it. So it's not a big deal unless you do it out of zirconia. It is a big deal when you put some of those posts that they're impossible to take out. Okay. A nice study, finally, systematic review, meta-analysis on molars and premolars, meaning do endocrowns are good for molars and premolars, and the answer is yes. I saw the other day a 2023 study, I think it was from Pascal, not sure, actually showing that endocrowns on the interior are behaving better than post, but I need to look into it a little bit more. We have a randomized double-blind clinical trial in Brazil that showed that it's better than post-current crown. And one of the last ones just coming out that increases the fracture strength. So now we're coming with the random out control trials in 2023. And this one was showing different materials, lithium silicate, enamic, and feldspatic, I think. Right, so it says, yeah, and they all work well. I know. How much science did I show you? And the ones that I left out, which were the bad articles, because some of them are bad articles. It works, guys. And we must, with this robust science, start thinking, this is the treatment. If I have an endodontically treated tooth that need a cap, that need to cap a cusp. If I have an endodontically treated posterior tooth that the marginal ridges are present, direct restoration. You have to do an inlay and an indirect inlay, go for it. Direct restoration. The integrity of that tooth is not compromised more than 5%. You have an MO or a DO, you might have to cap the cusp on a molar that are next to the missing marginal ridge. And what are you going to do as a design? Well, something like this. You're only going to remove about 1 millimeter or 2 from the top, and you're going to cut it flat like a bad margin, and then you're going to take your impression. And you're going to have to learn that if you're going to take an analog impression If you have undercuts inside the chamber, inside that hole right there, then you might rip the impression when it comes out. So if you're doing a analog impression, PBS or whatever, maybe you do wanna flow some composite there, maybe, you know, prime bond, flow some composite on top of the gutta percha, let it touch the walls a little bit, let it create something like this. Now you have to fill it up. Just let it create something that remove the undercuts. You might have to prep a tiny bit more, but don't go crazy on the prepping. If you're doing digital scanning, doesn't matter. You can scan everything. You might even have an undercut in there that you cannot scan. Doesn't matter, because the computer will adjust for it. It's going to drop a straight wall, and then whatever you're going to get out of the mill is going to fit. And whatever is an undercut is going to get filled by your cement if you put the cement correctly at delivery. Hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, we can talk about it in the Q&A. Okay. You do not need to wrap around things. And you can do this with many different shapes, with always the same idea that the more enamel and tooth structure that you leave behind, the better you are. Follow that rule and you're always going to be right. Do not be tempted to create a shoulder to create nothing, just flat. Save the enamel for when in 10 years that patient is coming to me or back to you. Save your enamel. Okay. And on the lab side, I don't know how many lab technicians are listening to this. You need to start believing that when a doctor sends you this, that they know what they're talking about. Because the number 3 thing that I get in my courses when I teach this is my lab doesn't want to do them. My lab doesn't want a margin to be halfway down the contact point. My lab says this will break. My lab, and my response to the students that come to me, and I am a technician by heart. If you tell me, oh, what are you first? I'm a technician first. Then I'm a dentist, then I'm a prosthodontist. My response to those students, to those dentists that take my class, is always the same. If your lab says something like that when you send it to them, it's time to find another lab. Really, it is. Because they're being ignorant about something. Not only that, they are actually saying no to a prescription that you're saying. So get on the idea that this works, that it's been proven, and learn how to deal with it as a lab side, and understand that if you've never done this before, and you have dentists that are going to start sending this to you, yes, the first time you do it as a technician, you're going to have some mistakes. You're going to have to figure out how to find the margins, how to finish it, okay? No matter how much or how little is missing, this holds true. You're going to have to learn to take an impressions, but impressions actually become easier because your margins are going to be super gingival. So these are easy impressions to take. I want to say thank you to Dr. Islam Saksok, who lent me some of these cases. Do you need a ferrule, like the picture on your left, to do whatever you think you're doing? No, do not cut more enamel. The picture on the left does not give you anything better, scientifically proven, than the picture on the right. Nothing. Actually, it's harder to seat. Much harder to seat, because now most of the time these crowns are milled. You're gonna have to mill in there. Let it be flat. Let it be like an endolay on the right. Don't try to do an endocrown like on the left, okay? And then try to maintain whatever shape you have left. Sometimes you don't get to do this perfect flat thing. Whatever you have left, try to adapt to it. Don't leave anything sharp, just round everything, but work with what you have. This does not help you. This is not doing any good. You just removed a lot of good tooth. That's what you did. Removed a lot of good tooth structure. Okay. Sometimes look at the lingual. Sometimes you're gonna be like, you're so trained to do a shoulder of a chamfer that you can't believe that the entire tooth can be like the buccal wall right here, just flat. Okay, just flat. Get a disc at the end, disc it all out. Okay, leave it like this. This is good. Okay, that allows me to do another one in 7 or 8 years. This is how they should look like. Okay, depending on the material you use. You get severe cases. Yeah, we can restore them. We're not going to put a post. We're not going to build up. We're not going to cut the enamel that we have. So that then we're bonding to cementing or dentin, which is way higher prone for caries. And the number one reason for retreatment or failure of any endodontically treated tooth that has a restoration on it is secondary decay. So I want to bond true enamel. Okay, I do this all the time. Even in difficult cases. Look at this case. We did not get rid of the entire back wall. We cap it, but I want that enamel and I want to bond to that enamel. This is the Dentistry Academy website, dentlic.com. Here we can see a lot of stuff. There's some free content there for you too. We have online courses, we have suture courses, material courses, we have live in-person experiences, 2-day courses on dental materials, on tooth preparation, on adhesion. It's one of the most sold out courses in the United States. You can also find some books there. I wrote a book that did pretty well. But as Jim was saying, you can find me at any time in my social media. I answer to everybody. I answer around 500 messages a day, sometimes 300, sometimes 1,000. I answer everybody. Now I answer short and quick. I have a dry humor, so I'm going to be smart. I'm going to be judgmental when you ask me something, but I am answering, and that's just my personality. So you have any questions about this lecture afterwards, after the Q&A, just follow me, send me a message, say, Miguel, you said this, you said that. Please don't ask me that paper that you had in slide 37, can you send it to me? My answer is going to be like, no, I'm playing with my kids in the park. I'm not going to go to my computer find it. I'm already giving it to you here. See, I'm smarky. Like I can snap. I can snap. Jim, I'm gonna open it back to you. I hope that we had a very nice scientific discussion, and I like this part more of answering everybody's questions.
And then Dr. Ortiz, you're going to be with us at the SCAD ProSec program.
Amazing,
doing a lecture,
amazing conference. Like the lineup is crazy.
Fantastic, yeah. So if you're interested in this, please let us know. Get a hold of us, and we'll show you how to join. But as Miguel's saying, I mean, the lineup itself is this isn't even all of them. I mean, we've got 20, 30 different lectures there in Chicago during November. It'll be a great time to be there. And specifically, they're going over minimally invasive digital protocols. And not just, this isn't just a clinical program. It's also laboratory. We've got a lot of laboratory technician speakers as well. So please join us if you can. If you need to get a hold of us here at the help desk, this is the information. And then Q&A. So let's get to Q&A so we can get this going. And let me find the questions here. All right. So one of the first ones is, as a lab, how should I market these restorations to dentists? So any insight into that to help us?
It's hard to market this. It's like, you know, as a technician and as a dentist, you will rarely see a situation in which you can bring up the conversation to a dentist. So I see that the only time that you can bring it up is if you still have a dentist that is sending you cast, post, and cores to like wax or design or mill. I don't know how we're doing it right now. And I would imagine that dentist is 67 and it's not going to listen anyways. Or is a prosthodontist very classically trained and he or she also is not going to listen. So the reality is, I don't know at the top of my head how a lab can promote this. What I do know, you better get good at it, because this is it. This is what's going to happen. Okay. My generation, I'm speaking to them directly. So now I'm 41. So the 40-something dentists, the millennial dentists, I'm speaking to them every day in social media. I'm showing this, and they might be reluctant for another 5 more years. But this is the treatment of choice. It's been proven. It's only growing, and many of them are the most adapter. The ones who adapt the most are the ones who mill in house, because that actually makes sense. But you're going to start receiving these cases, and now know, yes, that's a good treatment. Yes, it's different than what you've been doing. And you better put the protocols in place. I don't know if you're all digital, if you're still waxing up, whatever, to deliver this. Start getting ready to start receiving posterior indirect cases from the dentist where the margin and the contact are in the same place, interproximally. Stop calling the doctor and saying, this is wrong, you need to leave me space here. No, We need to save the marginal ridges, and I'm going to be sending you cases in which I prep the tooth just halfway to the contact point. And you better zoom in on your software, exocad or whatever, and find that margin and send me the restoration like that. That is the present and mostly the near future. So instead of thinking of how to sell it, how to support that dentist when these restorations are a little bit different. Understand that if a dentist that you have for 5-6 years now starts sending you this, understand that that dentist is also transitioning, is also learning how to take the impression, is also learning what material to use. So have a lot of communication to understand that the dentist can make mistakes and that you can make mistakes, and say, hey, oh, you started to doing this now? Okay, I'll do it with you. Let's work together. If it doesn't sit, let me know. I'll redo it. If it breaks, because there's going to be a period for every dentist that transitions into this, in which both the dentist and the laboratory are going to make mistake, and instead of blaming each other, I think if you build that trust, that's business.
Yeah, I think you said it earlier, and I think it's a key that from a technician standpoint, that learn it, understand it, accept it, provide that service for your customers, because you're going to start receiving them, and you don't want to push back and say, oh, we don't do this type of service. We're doing a lot of technologies today that we've never done in the past, especially with digital and so forth. So learn it, embrace it, and produce the best work that you can. And understand that, like, it was a great job, I think, Dr. Ortiz, with all the science backing what you've been saying. So there's a lot of research that you can do also as well for these techniques. So
send them my way. I'll be happy to talk to any of your clients. Like, literally, says like, if your client is sending this and you want to say, hey, I look at this webinar by Dr. Miguel Ortiz. He had all the science. Look, you're doing a shoulder. He showed how you don't need to, and it's easier if you don't, for example. But if you want to keep doing a show, we'll do it. But he said that you can reach out to him, and they can reach out to me. Like, I'll talk to anybody.
All right. So some of these other questions, I think you answered them some within the context of your presentation. But just to go over them, I think maybe some people came in late or missed what you said. So endocrowns, endolays, as you put it, which is a great vocabulary word we should introduce for dentistry. Do you have a preference as far as a one-piece or two-piece? Is there one better than the other? What's the conventional wisdom now of a post as one piece with the crown, or two pieces, three pieces?
I think the science that I showed is pretty clear. The multiple pieces, post, core, and crown, or post, core, and even onlay, is no better than one piece. Now, there is the only valid timid argument that I've heard that it might have some validity, but not scientifically fully proven yet, because they're doing it coming from a different angle, is the biomimetic approach of restoring the inside of the cavity with a material that is more dentin-like, and putting fibers, so they will reconstruct that and then do an onlay, because they're talking about how the modulus of elasticity and the fibers on the composite inside of that chamber could be beneficial. The way I address that is that I use enamic for all my endocrowns, and using enamic, which has a modulus of elasticity that is very similar to dentin, and it is amazing how strong it is, yet at the same time, when you drill it, it's like butter. I'm always amazed about how that infiltration of this resin inside of a known product, which is a feldspathic material, that's what enamic is, resin infiltrated into the empty voids of any feldspathic material. If you look at any feldspathic crown under the microscope, it's full of air. This glass matrix makes it so easily to mill. It's like you're milling plastic, but it's not. It's 86% feldspathic material. The modulus of elasticity of that material is very similar to that of dentin. So for all my onlays and endocrowns, what I do is I use enamic, and that seems to work very well. And to come back to answer the actual questions, there is no reason why you split this thing up. Definitely don't put a post. Posts are done. We don't use posts in dentistry anymore. Maybe if a patient comes with a completely broken front tooth and you need to kind of like give it a temporary whatever, but posts are done for anything on the premolar and back. Like the science is clear, we don't need them. Actually, they're detrimental to the future life of that tooth. So definitely not a three-piece. Now you want to fill the hole and then put an onlay, sure, but now your onlay doesn't have that internal retention that, even though I said retention and resistant form are not needed, I'm not saying that if we have it, it's no better. So if we have this internal retention form, that will definitely make this, none of these endocrowns that have like 2-3 millimeters or endolays deep inside the canal, they're not coming out. Like, trust me, they're not coming out. It's impossible to get them out. So if I have that, why would I fill it up with composite and then put an onlay on it? To me, it makes no sense, because now, yeah, now I have to, even though the science shows that the bone has enough strength to retain that for over 10 to 15 years. I showed that in my courses, all the clinical trials. Why would I take the risk? It's not like things never debone. It's not like crowns never debone. It's not like onlays never debone. No, sometimes they do. So I prefer to go in when I can.
All right. So this question is, depending on your posts, do you change the crown material? In other words, is there a relationship between the posts and core versus the crown material that you have to switch different materials because that post is made of a specific material?
Okay, so this question is coming completely different from endocrowns, if I understand it correctly. If I have a post and core that is made out of composite, or if I had a post and core that is made out of amalgam, or if I have a post and core that is made out of chrome cobalt, or you name it, or zirconia,
yeah,
should I change the composition of my crown? So this is completely different than what we're talking about here. I'll answer it, but it's completely different. There are arguments that you want materials to be alike, and there are arguments that in this case it doesn't matter. So let's say if I have right now when I think of my restorative material, if I am forced to do a crown, because I don't do crowns unless there's another crown there is no indications for crowns equal full cover restoration. There is no indication for crown except when a crown is already there or the tooth is completely broken down to the gum level, in which you do an endocrown. There's no other indication for it. I know, that's crazy, right? There's no other indication for it. I challenge you to give me an indication. Well, I need to change the color of a tooth. Then you should be near the front of it. Why are you getting rid of the lingual? Well, I had to do a full mouth reconstruction and fix occlusion. I hope you're not doing that. I'm a prosthodontist. That's over-treatment. But if you are going to do a mouth full of crowns, why are you getting rid of the lingual walls? Do they bother you so much? So I can go on forever. But usually when I have a post and a core, what determines the material that I'm using most of the time is color and aesthetics, right? If I have a metal post and core, like, yeah, resin and phosphatic, even Emax, it's going to show gray, right? Many times, depending on the thickness that you have. So if I have a zirconia post and core, maybe not as much, but sometimes they can be bright too, and they can come out like they can show you. So sometimes I find myself doing a zirconia crown, which I barely ever do, if I have in the front, you know, like a big gray metal post. So, but not on the, I don't make decisions on the modulus of elasticity of, you know, because they're going to break or something like that. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, like general, it depends on the situation, right? So, what is the resin material that you use to fill in the hole? Do you have a preference as far as when you do cover the hole?
When I put some on top of the gutta percha, because I want my endocrown part or endolay to go as deep as possible. Some science shows that it's better if it goes deep. I just use flowable. Just flowable. I let the flowable do its thing. I go in with the flowable, I put it, make sure it kind of touches the edges of the floor, and then see it do this kind of, and then cure it. Just a little bit of flowable. Not too much because it has a lot of contraction. You know, the degree of contraction is pretty high on flowable materials because they don't have too much fillers on it. So I don't put too much. I don't want it to shrink too much. Just flowable.
All right. And then interrelated, another question was down the road was, do you warm up your resin, your composite, to make it more flowable?
I use the resin cement, so I don't need to.
Okay. All right. Do you, is there a crown height ratio that you're careful about? You know how you showed a couple that were flat, right? And then some, what if you have a exceedingly high crown height? Is there a ratio that you try to stay away
because
from?
the concern or the worriness or the carefulness doesn't change if you go post core and crown than if you go endocrown. You still have the same concern. Everything is being retained by whatever tooth structure you have left. So this is not about, don't think about endocrowns and endolays. Listen to this. Don't think about endocrowns and endolays as if you have to rethink dentistry. Just compare it to the alternative and the answers become very clear. So am I worried that I don't have any tooth left to almost grab my endocrown from it? Yeah, I am worried, but that's all I have. And the worry is exactly the same if I had to put a post, a core, and a crown, right? Actually, the other one, I have now 3 or 2 layers of cement that I have to worry with, that things can come apart. With an endolay, I only have 1, right? So keep your questions in your head to like whatever you think endocrown doesn't click it for you, even though I show you all the science. Well, how doesn't it click for the endocrown, but it clicks for the post, core, and crown? And usually, if you're honest in your own thinking, you're going to realize that whatever you're questioning this treatment, you're going to have the same problem here, right? Either I have a little tooth structure left or I don't.
All right, very good. All right, well, if you got time for one more question, we'll do that. That just came in. Only, I know you're up against some time, so you kind of answered it before as far as using zirconia for for what you're talking about, an endocrown. We know that now a lot of zirconia is even being used for veneers, but you had mentioned it's tough to drill into it. But is there an instance in which you use zirconia?
I use zirconia only when I use zirconia for implant crowns, because the lab that I use gives me great results, and they like to work with that better. So I have nothing putting zirconia onto a custom abutment. I use zirconia or zirconia cores or coping sometimes if I have to cover some aesthetic abutment that is dark. In the front, I will layer sometimes a very opaque suprinity, lithium zirconia reinforced lithium silicate will also do the trick, and suprinity will allow you to stack porcelain much better to it, being a glass ceramic then or a feldspar based glass ceramic better than zirconia. So those are the reasons that I'm using zirconia. Usually on the anterior for some bridges, I use zirconia for bridges. So bridges, Maryland bridges, if I had to cover a dark abutment or a metal abutment, but most of the time when you bond either a feldspathic, a enamic, or a lithium silicate or lithium disilicate to a good substructure of tooth, your results are as good as having zirconia. So I don't find the use of zirconia to be needed. Science shows that it doesn't break more or less than other things. Actually, the glass ceramics will bond better and give you a better result. And I really don't like cutting them off. So I don't get any benefit using zirconia. It doesn't break less than lithium silicates or enamic or feldspathic when well designed and well cemented or well bonded, and they're pain in the neck to remove. So I try to stay away from them. I understand why people, we spent 50 years trying to get PFM to be really good, and we did. We got really good at it. Then we spent another 20 years trying to get all ceramics. We've spent 20 years in the last 20 years trying to understand lithium disilicate and lithium silicates to a point that is one of the best materials that we ever had. And now we're spending another 20 years kind of at the end of that, understanding zirconia. It did not bring anything better except for bridges and all-on-fours and things like that. At the unit, at the single unit level, did not bring anything better than lithium silicate. So I never saw the necessity. And now we're going to spend another 20 years analyzing the printable materials that we print pseudo ceramic, that they're still resin because they're printable, hybrid ceramics, blah, blah, blah. And by the end, by 2037, we're going to realize that, yeah, that we can print crowns that are as good as what we already have. So I never jumped into the Zirconia one on that quick. But if you're using it, nothing wrong with it.
All right. Well, before we sign off, any last comment you'd like to give the audience? Last thoughts, Miguel?
You can reach me at any time, and I'll answer. And Jim, thank you very much for all you do for me and for my family. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you again for doing this webinar for us. Thank you, audience, those who are attending. Please visit us again. Dr. Ortiz has a couple more scheduled for this year. Hope to see you there as well.
In October, right? In October, they should come to LA. In October, they should come to LA. In October, I'm going to be there in LA with you guys. A very intimate, small course. We have, what, 12 spots?
Yeah. Yep.
12 spots.
It'll be a great course, hands-on.
Yeah. So if you guys want to come in October to Los Angeles, I'm going to fly from Boston. I'm going to spend a whole day with you guys, only 12 of you. And we're going to spend an entire day talking about materials. You're going to learn everything you need to know about materials. And for about 5 hours, I'm going to have you finish all these materials. We're going to glaze them. We're going to stain them. We're going to modify them. We're going to work with hybrids. We're going to work with lithium silicates. I'm going to teach you how to polish and change the shade of body restoration. Very fun, very small. Be looking up for that email coming from VITA, because I'm assuming that's going to fill up within 2 hours. So, and there's no more spot to add. And I'm only coming for a day because I have 3 kids and I'm going to fly right back.
Yeah, it's a fantastic workshop, and technicians, this is for you as well. So don't be afraid to sign up, because he does. Dr. Ortiz goes over a lot of just practical stuff that we do every day in the lab and the clinic. So, all right. Well,
I think it's October 20 or 21st. Yes. You can email Jim and he'll let you. Thank you, everybody. I gotta go.
All right.
Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you for your time. This will conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, those of you that have attended. Thank you.